Hello, Blue Jays fans, and welcome to episode 268 of the Jays from the Couch radio podcast, brought to you by, of course, jaysfromthecouch.com. We're so happy you're tuning in for another week of Blue Jays talk with us, whether it's live, you're catching our live stream on YouTube, on Facebook, or Twitter. We really appreciate that. Don't forget that when you tune in live, you can send your comments and questions and whatnot via your comment section, and they'll appear here live on the show. And of course, if you're missing the live stream, don't worry. Relax. You can catch the audio version on Apple, Google, Spotify, everywhere you find a podcast, quality podcasts, you'll find Jays from the Couch. Just look us up there. And while you're at it, give us a little rate and review and all that stuff too. Helps us out a lot. And I'm your host. As always, welcome to another week. I'm Sean Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at Doyle JFtC. We've got an interesting episode for you this week. The trade deadline is but days away. Mere days, not even a full week. And we're going to hit on that after our news segment. And then our stat of the week. We're going to talk some whip. And every time you say it, you have to say it like that. Whip. It'll be an interesting conversation because I think there's a little bit of a surprise hidden in there. A pleasant one, of course. Speaking of pleasant surprises, I've got my co-hosts again this week, host of the On Feck Circle Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. The feckless wonder himself, Steve Feck. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Sean. How are you?
Excellent. You know what? Just peachy. Thank you for asking. And to join us, the north to Steve's south, the east to his west, the polar opposite, if you will, host of Sunny Side of the Dome, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on our YouTube channel, Karen Suter. Good evening, Karen.
Good evening, Sean.
All right. So before we came live, we were kind of talking back and looking at, what's newsy this week? Like in a season where the transactions, the revolving door, so to speak, of every clubhouse they've been to that they've had the pleasure of calling home. Lots and lots of moves. This week, really, Kirby Snead joins the big league club just before we went on air. And Barnes, of course, DFA'd. As Karen said before we went on a day too late, but anyway, it's happened. However, here we are, and that's about it for news, right? And Steve, I'm going to throw it to you here because I think you had a comment about the lack of news almost being news, so I'm going to throw it to you.
Well, I mean, you would think being this close to the trading deadline, there's not even any good, juicy rumors even. I think the closest you got was a JP Morosi rumor, which you automatically disregard because it's JP Morosi. So I'm kind of stuck for where to go. There hasn't been as much buzz about going back to Rogers Center on Friday either. I thought that would be like everywhere, and I don't know whether people just are afraid to believe it because the way COVID things happen, God forbid something else happens. But I mean, it just seems to be awfully quiet in Blue Jays land.
Yeah, and I don't know, Karen, if you think this is the calm before the storm. The quote unquote the end of the groundwork being laid, and eventually you kind of have to. I'm going to try and clean it up, but a friend of mine from New Zealand used to say, like poop or get off the pot, right? And I think we're kind of almost there, right? And I wonder, Karen, if you feel like this is just building toward the end of the week when something happens so that the Blue Jays are better than they are today.
There is news coming. as sure as I was that the Jays were coming back to Rogers Center this season, I am that sure that Ross Atkins is not getting off that pot without doing something significant. So it's coming. I don't.
Okay, be honest. All of us are right now running through poop jokes.
Oh, why don't we have 7-second delay? That would have been
But bottom line, I mean, I wish I had some inside info. I don't, but it's just a gut feeling. They're not. They haven't done everything that they've done up until this point. They didn't spend $80 million on Ryu and $150 million on George Springer, who's finally starting to heat up a bit, without at least trying to do something. I am not saying, I mean, I think it was Ben Nicholson Smith today tweeted about the Jays playoff odds, and they're there. They're not great. It's like 28.9 or something, even to make the playoffs. And he's saying that, well, this isn't the year to trade Austin Martin for a 2-month rental of Max Scherzer. I absolutely agree with that. I've been saying that all season. They shouldn't be emptying the cupboards for a rental. Now, if they were to, I'm not saying you absolutely don't trade Austin Martin, but you better get a darn good return and somebody who's sticking around beyond 2021. I'd be very reluctant to do that, but there is news coming of some sort, whether it looks more like it did last year, where they get mostly guys on expiring contracts and give up some prospects, but knowing that they're gonna, that it's gonna kill them to be without, or if they make a big splash, we'll see. But
yeah.
Something's coming.
Right. And I think that like the game of baseball, the business side of baseball has changed now, where you're not going to see the big rental packages that you would have seen a few years ago. You're not in the off season, you might see a bigger package, but for a 2-month rental, you're not going to see teams give up the same as they would if there was even just one more year of control on that player. And that's what makes the trade deadline so fascinating these days, to me anyway. You know what I mean? Like before, like 5-10 years ago, even you or even 6 years ago, 2015, you could get a David Price and just pull up a Brinks truck of prospects, and you can kind of see, okay, well, Toronto needs pitching. David Price is there on an expiring contract. That makes sense. But now the game of baseball, to try and figure out what a team is going to do at the trade deadline, it almost is more impossible than it was before. And that's what I love about the trade deadline. It's trying to figure out how teams match up and how they go about improving their team, because at the end of the day, each team, regardless of whether they're buyers or sellers, each team is trying to do that, right? They're either trying to improve for this year, maybe the next year, or 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road, right? So to me, that's fascinating, because there's a whole new layer of this with this idea of team control. Which, go ahead, Steve.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there. How much is the pending CBA really affecting this deadline? Because I think there might be levels of prospects that teams are going to want to move that are up in the higher ranks, because theoretically they're closer to the majors, and we don't really know what's going to happen with service time and things like that. So are players in the lower ranks of the minors actually more valuable for teams that are building than they have been in the past?
Yep, that's entirely possible, right? Because because there's so much unknown in the next little while, the short term, there is unknown there. Maybe teams are coveting the longer term pieces that they have, because at the very least they know they'll have them for years, right? It's an interesting wrinkle, and I never thought of that before. And you may be right. I think there's a million different elements that go into this whole idea of when to pull the trigger and for whom do you pull that trigger, which is why the meat of our episode this week is the trade deadline, because Toronto puts a whole nother layer. They have multiple layers to their trade deadline, right? And so behind the scenes, just for our listeners, a buddy of mine said, I don't know where he got the idea, but it was the first I had heard of it. So a buddy of mine says to me, and he's a Jays fan, and he loves the minor leagues, right? So he's all over the prospects and stuff like that. And he reads Ryan Mueller's daily minor league recap at Jays from the Couch. Anyway, he had an idea. What if Toronto could somehow get a package of talent for Marcus Semien and then for Robbie Ray, whether it's together or separate? And and he presented it in a way that was kind of logical, like being kind of a long shot, a playoff long shot this year, but they're close, so maybe trading these two could get them to a place next year where they're that much closer, right? And I was like, oh, so you're just going to give up on this season, are you? And he was, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess if you have to, because he kind of feels like it's a long shot anyway. And I thought, I never thought like that before. I assumed buy. Excuse me, not to quote NSYNC or anything, but that's BUY, buy, go shopping. Oh man. Anyway, and so that was where my head was, and then he dropped that on me, and I was like, oh, never thought of that. And then come to find out when I presented it to people at Jays from the Couch that was something that people were all over. And this is something that has been, and Karen, I'm going to start with you, driving you absolutely crazy. As I don't want to speak for you, but you are somebody who definitely believes in the playoff chances that this team has, currently today at just under 29% of making a wild card. So Karen, I'm going to allow you the opportunity to address this topic, because I feel like you have strong emotions about it.
Yeah, you could say that. I'm keeping myself in check a little bit, because over the last day plus, there's been a lot of frustration. There's been a little bit depression, honestly, and I mean, partly because the Jays have lost some winnable games, especially yesterday, but mostly for the people who call themselves Jays fans who are ready to give up at this point. And I mean, you do have to be realistic. So if they were double digits out of a playoff spot, if they were 12 games behind the second wild card, and it's already almost the end of July, I'd have to say, as much as this breaks my heart, I have to agree with you. They're not going anywhere this year. They've got to get as much as they can for the future. They are 4 games out of the second wild card spot. That is absolutely doable. And I just, honest to God, I have been so close to like screaming, swearing, telling these negative people where they can shove their attitude. And I don't want to get myself kicked off of this or any future podcast, because everyone has a right to their opinion and to express their opinion. And we want to keep it clean and suitable for all ages and all of that. But I mean, they're too close to be giving up. I don't want them, as I said earlier, giving up the farm for a 1-year rental in a year where, as I've said all along, the chances are very much against them winning it all this season. If they got into the playoffs, if they got hot, if they continued the better defense that they've been playing lately, and we looked at the numbers not that long ago, maybe they'd have a shot if they got lucky, if everything went well. But I see playoffs as a very real possibility. I still don't think that we've seen the best that this team has to offer. I'm not suggesting a perfect parallel with 2015, but I can see a run somewhat comparable to that in the final 2 months once they do whatever it is they're going to do at the deadline. And they're not just going to stand pat. They are going to improve this team, and they should be going for it without mortgaging their future. And we saw last year it's very possible to do that. And maybe what they should do is somewhere between AA going nuts and emptying the cupboards in 2015 and the more cautious approach, but still going for it like they did last year. So that's what I think. That's what I expect.
Right.
And everybody just sit back and keep watching, because good things are going to happen.
And to that point, I mean, and nobody is going to make the mistake of saying that Ross Atkins is going to pull the 2015 Alex Anthopoulos. Nobody's going to say that. However, to your point, the Blue Jays made up a ton of ground after the 2015 deadline, and I believe they won the division by like 8 games.
Six.
Thank you.
They were 8 games out of first.
Right.
When they made those trades, and they won the division by 6 games.
So there you go. They made up 14 games in a matter of 2 months.
2 months.
And we were all crying when they were playing in Baltimore, right? And Troy Tulowitzki whispered, or probably not whispered, but said to Alex Anthopoulos, "This is why you brought me here." And fans are chanting, "Thank you, Alex." Right? So it is technically possible. It is possible to go on a run. The difference that I see is that the division is way different, right? Like, really, the AL East, probably for the first time that I can even remember, maybe even the only time, the AL East was up for grabs across the board. And you didn't have Tampa Bay being the force that they are now. You didn't have the Boston Red Sox coming out of a place only Steve Feck knows, because he's the only person I've heard predict that they would be this good. So the division is different now, but math is still on their side, right? And so there is a little bit of faith, but at the same time, when you say they're only 4 games out of a playoff spot, it's a wild card spot, and yes, it is playoffs. I 100% agree with you. It's still the playoffs. I guess my question is, do you, Steve, this is the question for you, is mathematically, playoffs are there. But does it make sense to kind of keep Marcus Semien, Robbie Ray, for the chance, 28% chance of a wild card game?
Well, I think you can both move either a Semien or a Ray. I would be shocked if they traded Robbie Ray. I think they're going to do everything they can to try to sign him.
Yeah.
At Marcus Semien, there are playoff teams that desperately need a shortstop. Basically, in the same media market, Oakland and San Francisco, Marcus's home territory, they desperately need a shortstop. Both teams are going to make – the A's always make moves. You can never really figure it out until like 2 years after the trade, exactly what it is they did. But the Giants, I mean, obviously the Giants are for real. I think even the front office is surprised that they've hung in this long. But with Brendan Crawford out, they have enough pieces that they could move back to the Blue Jays, both from a prospect standpoint and to fill in a gap at the major league level, that they could deal for a Semien. And what Atkins and the front office is doing is actually improving their chances to go even deeper in 2022 or 2023. But really, they're still in the playoff hunt, because if you move Marcus Semien, Kevin Biggio goes back to second base. I think everybody would much rather have Kevin Biggio at second base than at third base or in right field or wherever they decide to play him. It's different with Robbie Ray. If you trade Robbie Ray, you are basically saying, "See ya, folks. Yeah. We'll see you in April of 2022," because Robbie Ray has saved this season. I mean, and in a lot of ways, you could say Marcus Semien has as well. But basically, without Robbie Ray, the Jays go nowhere other than competing for that playoff spot. But I don't see why you cannot sell a guy like Semien or an extra outfielder, whoever you want to pick. I mean, everybody wants to trade either Grichuk, or they want to trade Gurriel, or they want to trade Corey Dickerson, or you could still sell pieces and still set yourself up well to stay competitive this year, but drastically improve your chances long term.
Right. Now we don't want Karen's head to completely explode by suggesting a trade of Lourdes Gurriel. But Karen, you did want to respond there.
I just thought of a couple things as both of you were speaking. So first off, Sean, when you were talking about the differences between 2021 and 2015, and one of them being that this year the AL East is a much more competitive division, and you're absolutely right, it is. And that is one of the factors that I have factored into. And what have I been saying all along? The Blue Jays are a wild card team in 2021. I'm not expecting them to win the division. So I can see them getting one of those two wild card spots, and to me that's worth it. Like, just again, to have them in the playoffs, I said all along they'd get back to the playoffs and they'd have a better playoffs than they did last year. Now that can mean as much as winning one game. Maybe they win the wild card game and that's it, but at least they're on the right direction. And Steve, and both of you, actually, when you were talking about Biggio and moving him back to second base, would I rather see him at second base than third base? Sure, I would. But I want to ask you both what you think. My eyeball test tells me that he's been much better at third base lately than he was to start the season. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with earlier in the season, before he went on the IL, he was injured. And I'm not sure that any of us really know the extent to which that he was playing hurt until they finally put him on the IL. So, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you see him being a better third baseman than he was earlier in the season? I'm not talking Gold Glove, but
I think anybody's going to improve with more time. I think my real issue is just what they've done to him as an employer. The jerking him around from position to position, and no wonder he struggled. And who knows? Like you said, we don't know, but maybe this constant shifting and lack of comfortability could have even contributed to an injury. I don't know. I mean, and that may be far-fetched, but that is my real issue, and I don't blame him at all. But I think it does show just how they value a guy like Cavan Biggio. And it could be in a good way, we think he's so talented he can play third, or let's use him wherever just because it doesn't matter. Like, he's not going to be a star, and he'll be our Santiago Espinal-ish. You know what I mean? Like, I can't decide if it's they think really highly of him or the opposite. But Steve, I'll let you weigh in on Cavan Biggio.
Well, I would agree that they think very highly of him. That would be the camp that I am in. I do think they left him out, hung him out to dry, and they put him in a position to fail. I mean, I wrote an article, which people on Twitter bring up all the time, that Cavan Biggio is the long-term answer at third base. And I don't know from a throwing arm standpoint, from how he reacts with the ball off the bat, I think he's just more comfortable as the second baseman, which is why I would then say you could trade Marcus Semien. Is it going to hurt? Of course it's going to hurt. But you are now taking one of your core people that you value highly and placing at second base to let him get more comfortable and to demonstrate that he is still Cavan Biggio. This season doesn't mean he stinks. It means he was misused, he was hurt. Let's give him some confidence going in to the rest of the time he's going to be with the Blue Jays.
Right. Yeah. And maybe You know, I have this nagging feeling that Kevin Biggio is the first of the core to be traded, and I don't like it. It makes me not comfortable, but I just have this feeling that he will be moved at some point, and I don't like that. Very, very don't like that. I'm great with the words tonight. And then Karen, I see you shaking your head, so you obviously agree with me that, like, don't move them, don't trade them.
Oh, no.
But I just have this feeling, you know? And if I could articulate it better, I would. But we're going to move to our stat of the week. And this week I chose a pitching stat. Last week we did home runs. We started very simply with home runs. This week we're going to kind of do the B level of statistics, baseball statistics in the WHIP. Walks plus hits per innings pitched. And to me, one of the reasons why I like WHIP so much is that it actually isolates and defines what a pitcher does on the mound. Did you give up a hit? Did you give up a walk? Even when you consider earned run average and all of that stuff, there are other factors that go into it. And I know our resident couchers who are stat heads will say that there are much better metrics out there. But for me, who's simple, I like my math simple. Okay, I like my coffee a certain way. I like my math a certain way. If a 10-year-old can do it, that's my kind of math right there. But so walks plus hits per innings pitched, and it's actually not only simple to kind of understand, but I think a lot of fans, if it were being used on a regular basis, the way ERA is, earned run average, I think a lot of fans would be completely comfortable with it because it is one of those accessible stats for everybody. So I just brought up the 2021 Toronto Blue Jays and sorted them by WHIP. And remember, to both of you, that when you say this, you have to say WHIP. I don't care if you go off and swear about trading Lord Gurriel or anything, but you have to say WHIP. Anyway, so sorted them. And here is the real reason why I wanted to talk about WHIP this week, because Robbie Ray, he of the Walking the Planet previously, I'm not joking. Like, this guy he was might as well call him Rick Grimes, because there were walkers everywhere. Like, it was bad. However, thus far in 2021, in 112.1 innings pitched, which by the way leads the Toronto Blue Jays. Robbie Ray leads the Toronto Blue Jays in innings pitched. Hello. Anyway, 142 strikeouts, just 27 walks, for a WHIP of 1.050. That leads the Toronto Blue Jays. He has the highest WHIP of any Blue Jays pitcher, including Hyunjin Ryu, who is at 1.182. Still very good.
Don't you mean the lowest?
Well, yeah.
What did I say?
You said the highest.
Did I?
Yes.
He's highest in the rankings. Whoops. See what I mean? Words. I like my words simple too. Yeah. Let's time out. We'll edit that part out. No, we won't. But anyway, yeah, Robbie Ray. So this is why I wanted to talk about WHIP. So Karen, I'm going to start with you. And talking about WHIP, first of all, as a stat, is it something that you can get on board with, and your Blue Jays observations with regards to WHIP?
Yeah, I mean it's useful. I'm still I'm old. I'm an old baseball fan. I still value earned run average to me. I mean, I talk a lot about how I think strikeouts by pitchers are overemphasized because their job is to go out there and minimize opposition's runs. So like to me, if somebody is doing that, that's what I care about. And walks and hits, the fewer walks and the fewer hits that you're allowing, the fewer runs are going to be on the board for the opposition. So it's great. And yeah, about Robbie Ray and the walks, I mean, I still remember when the trade was announced, I'm like, okay, who the heck is this guy? So I go right to the stats and I look like, oh my goodness. And then somebody even said, yeah, he leads, and not in a good way, all of Major League Baseball in walks per 9 innings. I'm like, they're trading for this guy. Why? But they clearly saw. They clearly saw something that I didn't, and that maybe some people didn't, because I mean there was a very good all-star caliber pitcher lurking inside of them, and he just they needed to find the way to unlock that and bring it out, and they have.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, as much as they traded for him, which to me, that's why he re-signed here with the Jays. I cannot imagine that had he never played for the Toronto Blue Jays, that they would have been his go-to destination as a free agent. But he signed early last November, and I'm hoping to goodness that the Jays make him a fair market offer, and that it's his choice to continue to stay here.
Yeah. So, Steve, I'm going to throw it to you, and you downplay this so much, and I wish you wouldn't, but you downplay the fact that you have a lot of experience in the kind of the scouting side of baseball, and you don't talk about it enough because I find it fascinating. But to come from that perspective and look at a stat like WHIP, is that something that I think somebody like yourself, who kind of the eyeball test is king, is that something that WHIP is something you can get on board with as an evaluation tool?
Oh, I've always embraced WHIP because it truly does. I mean, it adds to ERA. ERA again. I mean, I believe in like the basic back of the back baseball card stats, that have always been around. But WHIP is really showing how effective that pitcher is from inning to inning and appearance to appearance. So just to give you that, okay, Ray has always given up a lot of home runs. And with a pitcher like Robbie Ray, that's just something that you accept. It's okay, he's given a bunch of home runs. Because he was walking so many guys in Arizona, his WHIP, I'm sure, was up above 1.5, 1.6 most times. He's still given up 23 home runs this year, but his WHIP is 1.050. That's showing that he is managing his pitches and the pitchers and his approach in the game. He's managing it much better. So I think WHIP is a great way to look at a player and see, is this player making progression or are they regressing? Yeah. So I mean, I personally love WHIP. I always try to resist to not dump on the analytics crowd, because Lord knows I make enough stupid proclamations that I really don't need to add fuel to the fire with somebody else. But you take a guy like TJ Zoik. Everybody loved TJ Zoik because of his expected and his projected performance. This year, his WHIP is 2. And he gave up almost 3.6 home runs per 9 innings pitched. So he didn't really have a whole lot of margin for anything. He'd given up home runs, okay, but he didn't have any margin for error, and he just has demonstrated that he has regressed since he came up. in the majors. So I think WHIP is a very good stat for someone, whether you're old school, like all of us, or probably more old school than with the analytics crowd. And scouts, I think, have always used WHIP. They didn't really start calling it that really until rotisserie and fantasy baseball came around, because that was one of the original stats, for rotisserie and fantasy baseball. But they were always tracking that stuff, the hits and the base runners, per game, because that is an indicator of how the pitcher is controlling his outing.
Right. And the other thing I like about it too is that because it's per innings pitched, right? So, somebody like Zoik, who wouldn't have 112 innings to draw from, it's kind of a fair stat, right? Because you're judged on what you had the opportunity to do. And just since you brought it up, Steve, I wanted to go to Robbie Ray in 2020 with Arizona. His WHIP was 2.000. And your notion on progress or regress, when he came to Toronto, his WHIP was 1.742. It went down to the shiny 1.05 that it is currently, right? And that is exactly what you're talking about, that progression. So if for our listeners and our viewers out there, if you want to sound smart, you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, check out a player's WHIP, walk plus hits per innings pitched. It's a valuable stat. It's one that I personally rely on quite a bit. And I also rely on these two fine folks every week for joining me and adding to the conversation, because without you, it would be just me, and that would be boring AF. So, so thank you both for once again bearing with me and my blunders, as I say that Robbie Ray has the highest WHIP on the team, and that's awesome. Anyway, it happens.
He's the highest rated WHIP performer. How about that?
There you go. See, this is why I need you both. I can't do this without you. Steve, let everybody know how they can follow you and all that fun stuff.
Well, I have embraced my Jason on the Couch Radio podcast persona. I've changed my Twitter handle to @FecklessWonder. I host the On Feck Circle Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up this week, we're going to talk, we'll talk some trade deadline stuff. I do want to review some more stories about people that how they became Blue Jay fans as part of the Blue Jays way. But we're also going to come up with a segment called They Might Be Blue Jays. So it's going to be guys that the Blue Jays have actually acquired in past trading deadlines that you might actually be surprised that they were actually Blue Jays. So we're going to touch on some of those guys as well.
Awesome. Can't wait for that. And Steve, also you're turning your how you became a Blue Jays fan. That'll be a post up tomorrow morning, I believe.
JFtC.com. Yes.
That's correct. All right. And Karen, your turn. Let everybody know how they can follow you and catch your show.
Yes, well, I'm on Twitter, unless people just drive me absolutely nuts and I decide to take a break. But when I'm on Twitter, you can find me at Karen Soutar1, exactly as it's spelled there, SOUTAR1. And I do spend a fair bit of time on Twitter. Love to chat respectfully on both ends about baseball or whatever else. And this is a fun week leading up to the trade deadline on Friday, as well as the first game back in Toronto in almost 2 years. There's this podcast today. There's Steve tomorrow. And I'm on a special night this week. Instead of my usual Thursday, I'm on Wednesday this week for Sunny Side of the Dome. So if you want to hear about the Blue Jays with a very positive slant, tune on in, and whatever you guys do next Monday, I won't be a part of it because I'm going to the Jays game that starts at 3:00 in the afternoon.
I think we need a live remote, personally. There should be a live remote from Rogers Center. We want to see how happy you are.
I think you can tell right now. And this is why.
Yeah,
This is why our audio listeners need to tune into our live broadcast, because right now, if you're listening at home, you do not get to see the joy, the absolute joy that is all over Karen's face right now, because she will be watching a Blue Jays game live and in person. And that's something that you miss out on. So tune in on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and catch our podcast where we air live. You can share your comments and questions and all of that fun stuff. Make sure you head to JFtCouch.com. We've got lots of trade deadline coverage, of course, as well as just great Blue Jays stuff as well. Ryan Mueller's daily minor league recaps are
must read. Must read.
The format of it is you get through the whole system and you've got it. You know, it's simple, it's laid out for you, and it's perfect. It's the perfect minor league update. So make sure you head to Jays from the Couch for that. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. Still learning that, but you know what? We you know the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, this old dog is proving that theory correct. But anyway, we're there. We're on Instagram. And of course, Karen's and Steve's show is Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Karen, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This week, normally Thursdays. So for Steve, for Karen, for Robbie Ray, this is Sean Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at Doyle JFtC. Hoping life gives you a juicy fastball in the middle and you don't miss it. Take care.